The truce in the Gaza Strip seems to be holding, even though there's a lot of mistrust on both sides. Can the Egyptian brokered ceasefire last? What guarantees are needed to make it work? And what does the latest crisis mean for the Middle East? This is Inside Story. Hello again, I'm James Bays. After 8 days of bombardment, rocket fire and bloodshed, Israel and Hamas have agreed to a ceasefire. And for now, it's holding. Both Israel and Hamas were quick to claim a victory. In Gaza, where the bombing stopped for the first time in days, people filled the streets to celebrate. In Israel, there's been a lot of debate about the truce ahead of the elections scheduled for January the 22nd. So what are the terms of the ceasefire? Well, it includes a promise by Israel to stop all attacks on Gaza by land, sea and air. Hamas, in turn, will stop its violence on Israel, and the agreement also says other factions like Islamic Jihad must abide by the truce too. Israel has also promised to ease restrictions on the movement of goods and people by opening Gaza's borders. But the agreement says no shipments of rockets are allowed into the Gaza Strip. Before we start our discussion, let's take a look at some of the main players who were involved in the latest Israel-Gaza conflict. Start with Israel, and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his government say the bombing campaign in Gaza was to stop Hamas and other factions from launching rockets at Israel. But some observers accuse Netanyahu of testing the new power balance in the Middle East, warning neighbouring countries like Egypt that there are limits to their influence. Hamas, led by Khalid Mashal, with strong links to the Muslim Brotherhood, has benefited from the new leadership in Egypt. Its members believe they've won favourable terms in the truce, including opening Gaza's border. Egypt's President Mohamed Morsi has taken an assertive role leading the negotiations that resulted in the truce. Though he's trying to reflect the will of Arabs, he's constrained by Egypt's reliance on US aid and by his country's long-standing peace treaty with Israel. The US threw its weight behind Israel in the latest conflict, blaming Hamas for the outbreak of violence, but it got engaged, joining in efforts that brought about the ceasefire. So can the Gaza ceasefire last? To help answer this question and more, we're joined by our panel of guests. In Cairo, Abdullah Al-Shaal, professor at the American University in Cairo, former Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs and an international legal expert. From Philadelphia, we have Greg Roman, Jewish Community Relations Council of Pittsburgh. He's the director there and a former advisor in the Knesset and a one-time official with the Ministry of Defence. From London, we have Azam Tamimi, author of Hamas Unwritten Chapters. Azam is also director of the Institute of Islamic Political Thought. And I'd like to start, if I can, with you, Azam. Can you answer our question of the day? Do you think the ceasefire can hold?
It can hold as long as Israel wants it to hold, because on every single occasion when a truce was reached in the past, it was Israel that violated it. And therefore, Israel can decide whether it wants it to hold or not.
Your view on that, please, Greg?
I believe that the truce that he's speaking about that Israel supposedly violated about a week ago when this operation started with the assassination of Ahmed Jabari was in response to Palestinian militant attacks on the Gaza-Israeli border. Unfortunately, a 13-year-old boy was killed, but it wasn't because of any Israeli soldiers. It was because of crossfire between Palestinian militants that were trying to place a 500-pound bomb on the border that eventually targeted the 4th IDF patrol over a period of 3 days when the rocket fire started. So this round of violence was actually the responsibility of Hamas and Islamic Jihad, not of Israel.
Well, we've heard in many ways both the sides there, Abdullah, in Cairo. Egypt right now is acting as the guarantor for this truce. How hard will it be for the Egyptians?
Yes, this is very significant because Egypt before was in favor of Israel. Now Egypt is trying to be in favor of the right, not in favor of any other side. And Israel was trying to judge whether Egypt is changing or Egypt is as it was before the revolution. So this was a test for Cairo and how far Egypt could go with Gaza against Israel. So I think that responding to your question that had been put to my colleagues, I think that the ceasefire accord is going to hold because Egypt is guaranteeing that, and Israel is very keen not to damage its relations with Egypt, especially because there is some sort of concurrence between the United States and Israel and Egypt. And in this, I think a growing friendship between the new regime and the United States is very important for Obama. And this is very tricky line between the United States and Israel.
Right, well, I'd like to ask each of our panel, not the rather simplistic question who won, but a slightly more nuanced one. As we look at the balance of the power in the region, who may have benefited from the last 8 days? If I can start with you, Greg. Israel normally likes to choose the time of the start of a war and choose the time of the end of a war. This time, though, it was forced to end the war by mediation.
I wouldn't agree with that statement. If anything, the last 4 years have shown that Israel chooses when it would like to end a conflict. And in this case, once again, Israel also chose when it would be able to end the conflict. We've seen 3 significant successes here in terms of the Israeli side. The first has been a weakening of Hamas's armed division. The head of its division, Ahmad Jabari, was taken out. You have 35 other key command and control centers and leaders who were also taken out. And you also have the long-range rocket capability significantly reduced. Now, while that can be used as a weapon of terror, its ability to make any significant strategic damages was mitigated by the Iron Dome protection system, which was also a huge success in terms of its performance during the last 8 days. Additionally, any kind of divide that had existed between President Barack Obama and Benjamin Netanyahu is now gone. We've seen a sort of reflourishing of the relationship between Washington and Jerusalem because of Netanyahu's willingness to negotiate a ceasefire. And in doing so, we've strengthened the relationship, not just with the United States, but also the public support we've gotten from Western European countries and also from the rest of the NATO rim, except for Turkey, of course, which has always been an antagonizer in this realm. So I think that if you look at the ability for Israel now to choose when it will be in conflict again with Hamas, what we have now is the legitimacy of us being able to accept a ceasefire, and the next time that the hostilities are commenced by the launching of rockets or by that tragic bus bombing that took place in the middle of Tel Aviv, what we will see is Israel with full legitimacy to respond in the way that it needs to because it accepted a ceasefire, not because it was forced to.
Well, I'd like to see what Azam makes of that. A military success for Israel. They've wiped out many of the long-range rockets, and they've also got this Iron Dome now, which means that Hamas's rockets, even when they are fired, many of them are neutralized.
Well, this is the second major war Israel has launched with the intention of destroying Hamas or destroying its capabilities. And as in the previous time, Hamas will only emerge stronger, more popular and more credible and authentic. The Israelis can delude themselves and say whatever they like to condone themselves having lost once more the objective of their onslaught. As far as the Palestinians are concerned, this was a victory for the Palestinians, a victory for Gaza, a victory for Hamas, and it was duly celebrated as such.
Well, both sides are declaring victory. The leader of Hamas, Khalid Mashal, has been talking about what happened over the last 8 days at a news conference in Cairo. He said the Israeli attack failed and the leaders of the enemy failed in their adventure. 8 days of fighting forced them to give in to our conditions. He went on to say the destruction left by Israel did nothing to change the fact that the resistance won. A comment on that, please, Greg?
Sure. I think that if the chief of your military wing can be taken out whenever the Israeli side determines so, this spells danger for the future of Hamas's political and also military leadership. Israel has the capability to decide when, where, and if it will respond to any ticking bomb attacks, and it can track the entire infrastructure of the Hamas military wing, but also its political operations. In addition, what this did is it weakened the ability for Mahmoud Abbas to come to the United Nations on November 26, pursuing the unilateral Declaration of Independence through a vote of the General Assembly to be accepted as a non-state member. Now, I think we have to look at this on two certain aspects. First is the rise of political Islam and the new alliance between the Muslim Brotherhood and Mohammed Morsi in Ismailia and Halab Meshal and Abu Marzouk in Cairo in the recent negotiations. And I also think we have to look at the weakening of the Fatah leadership. Now, Israel will not be benefited by any weakening of the Palestinian Authority. However, a conflict will eventually resolve where the Palestinians will have to choose which leadership they will decide to take them on the path to peace or the path to war. So if we choose Hamas, we will see more violence. But if the Palestinians realize that they want to go with a body which is more capable, they hopefully would choose the Palestinian Authority. But now what we have is increased Israeli deterrence and less likeliness of Hamas trying to kill Israeli civilians. And that is the true victory.
Abdullah, if I can ask you, we've seen in the last week pictures on the TV of the bombardment of Gaza, and in many ways they look very similar to the pictures in 2008. But if we widen our perspective and look at the regional map, so much has changed. Do you think Israel is weaker now because of the regional position?
I think from the strategic point of view, Israel is no longer the master of the scene. And Israel now realizes that we have the impact of the Egyptian revolution on the Egyptian authority and decisions. And if Morsi himself is not eager to stand for Israel, I think the Egyptian people in the streets are going to take this for themselves. And this is very dangerous between Morsi and his audience. So this is why I think Israel was trying to test the new regime in Egypt and to see the ceiling of its action. And secondly, also, I think electoral calculations were there in the Israeli decision. And at the end of the day, Israel can say that it had gained. It had gained what? It had liquidated some of the major military leaders of Hamas, because the strategy of Israel is to liquidate Hamas gradually and on some portions.
Okay, I'd like to bring in Greg, because you've mentioned the Israeli election taking place on the 22nd of January. Greg, I'd like your perspective on that, because this will be judged politically as well as militarily. How does the Prime Minister Netanyahu fare after these 8 days, do you think?
Well, I think that there's two levels of leadership we have to look at. The first is the triumvirate of Avigdor Lieberman, Ehud Barak, and Benjamin Netanyahu. Two of those are running together for the Knesset, and the other is no longer really relevant in the polls. The larger form of 9 ministers, which is called the Security Cabinet, which also includes the Shas Party with Eli Yishai and Yuval Stinetz, the Finance Minister, was widely split in the decision to accept the ceasefire. But at the end of the day, I believe that 90% of the Israeli Knesset supported the operations, and what is going to happen now is a recalculation of the Israeli political map. An individual, Benjamin Netanyahu, who was once accused as a hawk, has accepted a ceasefire. We see traditional center-left and left-wing parties under Sheli Yachimovich in the Labour and also Shaul Malfaz in the Kadima, along with a new party, Yair Lapid and Yesh Atid, or We Have a Future, calling for increased military action. So what was yesterday will no longer hold on January 22nd, and the parties will have to adapt their messages in order to be able to get that electoral victory, since everything we once knew in terms of security policy and foreign policy has been turned upside down on its head. But in the long run, I think that because of the Israeli successes, whichever political party takes over in the Knesset and whoever becomes prime minister, they'll have much better footing internationally in terms of legitimacy for another operation should violence increase, and also to increase relations with Egypt and Jordan, with the recent exchange of ambassadors between Egypt and Jerusalem, and also between Amman and Jerusalem. I think we're looking at a period where we may have an opportunity for peace talks out of this last round of violence. And I really hope that this is the case.
Okay, but you've explained, I think, the slightly confusing Israeli political picture, because we have lots of new leaders of parties, lots of new parties, and I know there's still 2 months to go. But right now, if I would ask you to call it, does this help the Prime Minister? Because he was well ahead in the polls before the fighting.
I don't believe it helps him, but I also don't believe that it hurts him. I think that most of the commentators are going to have to wake up after the Shabbat. Now it's the Israeli weekend, and we'll see the Sunday papers with new poll numbers. One poll is that we saw 70% of the Israelis think that this ceasefire should not have been accepted. It was a snap poll that was conducted by Channel 2 last night. But at the same time, we saw Haaretz release another poll today showing that the Prime Minister was receiving support from center-left individuals who typically never actually gave him any support. So I think it's too early to make a call.
OK, Greg. Well, we heard that both sides were claiming victory, and the Israeli Prime Minister was one of those. He released a statement after the ceasefire. That statement from Benjamin Netanyahu said, "We hit most of the senior officers, destroyed thousands of rockets that were aimed at southern Israel and most of the rockets that were aimed at central Israel. We destroyed Hamas's control over the Strip." Would you agree with that, Azam?
Well, indeed, the Israelis managed to butcher our children, to burn journalists alive, to destroy the infrastructure in Gaza. As far as the impact of this onslaught on Hamas or Islamic Jihad or the military capabilities of the resistance, the Israelis can rest assured that these capabilities are mostly intact. And if the Israelis ever think of attacking Gaza again, they will be taught a very bitter lesson.
How do you think, Azam, it changes the balance of power among the Palestinians? How does it affect particularly the Palestinian Authority? Mahmoud Abbas was not that popular before this fighting. How does it affect the position of those leaders in Ramallah?
I think this recent event only confirms how irrelevant the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah has become for the Palestinians as a whole. This onslaught on Gaza it puts Hamas in a position of being the true leader and representative of the aspirations of the Palestinian people. We saw foreign ministers from the Arab world and from Turkey flock to Gaza to express solidarity, and not a single member of the Palestinian Authority thought of coming to do that. And that is clearly shows where Palestinian representation lies.
Yet, Abdullah, all the Western leaders we saw, Hillary Clinton, Ban Ki-moon, they were still going to Ramallah. Do you think it's time for the West to change its approach to Hamas, particularly now that Hamas has what to the West probably are now more acceptable friends, people like Egypt, people like Qatar, people like Libya, people like Tunisia?
Yeah, I think the support of some other states, especially Arabs with Egypt, gave a very strong signal to the United Nations and to the United States that Israel is no longer free to do whatever she likes against Hamas and the Palestinians. And I think this is a prelude for a new launch for a peaceful settlement in the region. This is very good ground for President Obama to proceed now courageously and to build on what is taking place now. Hamas has become an original factor. It is not a coup d'etat. It is not an alien to the region. It is not a terrorist organization. It is a legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. And this is one of the major achievements of this confrontation.
Greg, Israeli politicians throughout history have proved themselves pretty pragmatic. Do you think they're now going to decide that really it's a waste of time dealing with the Palestinian Authority?
I don't think so, because as you had previously said, the diplomatic address is the PLO and also Ramallah. But in addition to that, we saw Hamas revert to its old tactics from the Second Intifada. They released a video calling for the resumption of suicide bombings in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. And they also took 6 Palestinians who were denied justice through extrajudicial killings and chained them up to the back of motorcycles, driving them through the streets of Gaza City after they summarily executed them in front of thousands of Palestinians, only based on the accusation of so-called collaborating with Israel. And the other thing, in response to Azam's comment about alleged butchering of children, what we saw back in 2007 was Hamas throwing Fatah members off the top of 15-story buildings. So we're not dealing with your regular organization that's interested in pragmatic peace. What you're dealing with is a terror organization who's willing to kill their own people and put them at harm's way, only to achieve minimal goals in the terms of populist sentiment.
Azam,
and in addition,
Azam wants to come in there. Azam.
Okay.
He's just repeating the lies. There is no evidence that Hamas ever threw anybody from the top of a building. And my own channel, Al Hiwar channel, produced a documentary proving that the guys who threw the person, the bearded person, from the top of the building were actually from the Fatah group, because they thought the bearded person was a Hamas member, and he turned eventually to be a Fatah member. And these Zionist compulsive liars just keep lying about Hamas in order to distort its image in front of the international public opinion.
Okay, Azam, you've made your point there. The purpose of this discussion, though, is to look forward. And can I ask you again about the Palestinian Authority? Mahmoud Abbas or his representatives are supposed to go in the next couple of weeks to the United Nations to try and change their status to an enhanced status, non-member status. It would give them access to the international courts. Do you think that is a good move for the PA now to make?
Well, that's Mahmoud Abbas' business and decision. It's, as far as I'm concerned as a Palestinian, it's really irrelevant. You see, for us, the issue was never a Palestinian state. For us, the issue has been the fact that we were thrown out of our homes in order for the Zionists who came from Europe to create a state for themselves. This is the issue.
Can I ask you,
the world needs to...
Can I ask you about that UN vote? Is there a possibility Israel's threatening to cut the finance of the Palestinian Authority? Could this be the final death blow to the Palestinian Authority if that were to happen?
Well, it's all in the hands of the Americans, actually. If the Americans want to abandon the Palestinian Authority, they can, because they are its protectors, they are its funders. And the Israelis also have a say in this, because the Israelis benefit a lot from the collaboration provided to them by the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah.
OK, I want to talk about the Americans. We mentioned them there, Abdullah. We've seen an engagement in the last few days that perhaps we haven't seen many times during President Obama's first term. We saw old-fashioned shuttle diplomacy by Hillary Clinton. Do you think we're seeing a new approach by the Americans and a new relationship with Egypt, working very closely with the Americans?
In fact, this gave me two signals, and I'm afraid that these two signals are contradictory. The first signal is that the United States is trying to work with Egypt on a new basis so as to pacify the situation between Hamas and Israel. And this is new, because before the United States was working with Mubarak, who was very much in favor of Israel. So in this case, Washington knows exactly where does Mohammed Morsi stand concerning Gaza and the equation in this area. And the second signal is that whether the United States is eager to work with Egypt now on a solid way so as to pave the way for a new peace that Egypt can lead, or this is just a figuration of what we see now. So I think that, on the other hand, if the United States is serious in working with Egypt, I think this is going to rebuild the relations between Egypt and the United States, because, of course, we have imbalances in this structure of relations since the days of Mubarak.
Okay,
so
let me bring in Greg on the points that you raise. Greg, apparently in the last few days, President Morsi, President Obama spoke on the phone some 6 times. President Morsi is an ally of Hamas. Should Israel be worried?
I don't believe so, because President Morsi's internal worries in his own backyard are the reason why he's speaking so much with President Obama. He's facing 5 strategic threats right now to Egyptian instability, which actually led the popular resentment to burning down your offices outside Tahrir Square. The first is economic instability, and they need U.S. loan guarantees in order to maintain the Egyptian economy. The second is tourism figures in terms of income that's coming from FDI, or foreign direct investment. Morsi needs a good relationship with Obama in order to maintain that sense of serenity to increase the amount of tourism that's going to Egypt. The third is the stability in the Sinai. The Americans have a force of over 1,000 soldiers from the 82nd Airborne Division currently stationed to monitor the truce between Israel and Egypt. And Morsi is going to try to ask Obama to put pressure on Israel to allow the entrance of more Egyptian forces to take care of the chaos which is currently going on there. The fourth action we have to worry about is the smuggling that's coming from Libya and eventually ending up with arms going to Gaza. Now, while Morsi in principle might be behind this due to his political beliefs, he's aware that any instability in Gaza will lead to further instability in Sinai, therefore further destabilizing his regime. But the most important aspect of
we
Morsi
have to
acting
end
as
there.
a mediator.
Greg, we have to end there. We could discuss this for hours and hours, but I'm afraid we've run out of time. Thank you to all our guests, Abdullah Al-Shaal in Cairo, Greg Roman in Philadelphia, and Azam Tamimi in London. And thank you very much for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. What did you think of our discussion today? What subject should we discuss next time? We'd like to hear from you. Contact us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. We'll have read all your emails by the time I'm back here again in 24 hours' time. Bye-bye now.